Hello, everybody, and welcome back to World History 1. So, today we're going to be beginning our series on the ancient civilizations. So, to get us all into it and get our heads in the right place, let's take a look at a couple of things. First off, here is the SOL standards that we will be covering with this unit as we go over the next several classes. And here, of course, is the vocabulary. Go ahead and take a moment to pause the video and take a look at these. Make sure that you know the vocab. They are important to help you understand what we are doing. All right, so river valleys. We mentioned those in the last unit where hunter-gatherers would be settling and starting to make those permanent settlements during the Paleolithic era, the New Stone Age. I mean the Neolithic, actually, for the New Stone Age. So, why would people be settling in the river valleys? It is because these valleys had rich soil because of all the nutrients in the ground through the water and everything. And we have the irrigation that you can use for watering your crops. So these areas would also be good locations because they could more easily be protected from invaders. All right, because a river that can be a natural land boundary that an enemy might not be able to cross. All right, so here we are going to see a map of all the places and peoples we're going to be talking about over the course of this unit. Now, the ones that are labeled with the green boxes, those are our river valley civilizations. So like today, we're talking about Mesopotamia. Next time, Egypt, and then we're going to have India and China. But we're also going to be having some civilizations that didn't necessarily go into river valleys, but they are still early and important civilizations, like the Hebrews, the Phoenicians, the Nubians. These are all important groups that we're going to talk about because they're among the first civilizations to develop, like in human history. Now, today we're focusing on Mesopotamia. Mesopotamia is an area called the Fertile Crescent. Now, a crescent is a curve. All right, so think of like a crescent moon, and that Fertile Crescent is the Tigris and Euphrates rivers that run through modern day Iraq, and it curves down, goes down the eastern coast of the Mediterranean Sea to the River Jordan and the Sea of Galilee in Israel. This is all the Fertile Crescent. This is where we're going to see the Mesopotamians start to settle and create this early civilization, particularly in the area around the Tigris and the Euphrates rivers here. So, some characteristics. Tigris and Euphrates rivers. Mesopotamia translates basically to land between two rivers, meaning the Tigris and Euphrates. This is where people believe that the agricultural revolution really got its start. So as we've seen some of the earliest evidence showing the domestication of plants and animals and the earliest settlements that you could say are like going to help bring on urban culture, having craftsmen and things like that, as depicted here in this image. Now, the earliest of these civilizations, and like I guess you could say people, is with a territory that would become known as Sumer. Early civilization is Sumer, which is now in southern Iraq. It grew into a powerful and prosperous, like I guess you could call it a kingdom, uh, centered around the city of Ur, which, if you look in the map, is here in the southern area. And the Sumerians, they invented the earliest form of writing that has been discovered, and it is called cuneiform. An example of it is here at the bottom, where it's basically you have a clay tablet, like a wet, malleable clay tablet, and you would push into it with a stick, essentially, and pressing lines in place. And the way that those are set up will tell you either a word or a letter or things like that. The earliest evidence of the wheel being invented comes from Sumer as well. They did have large building projects in this early civilization. This is how we get the ziggurat, which is the Mesopotamian version of a pyramid. They are a step pyramid. There is an example in the lower right picture of a step pyramid. You see it right here. I'm circling it with my mouse, where it steps upward all the way to the top. No smooth sides like in Egypt. That is a much later engineering development that the Egyptians used. But it started with pyramid building with these step pyramids. Now, what might you think that these pyramids would be used for? So typically with these ancient cultures, especially when you get into like the North African and Middle Eastern areas, typically they're going to have some type of religious like significance, where the rituals would be performed at the top, sacrifices, offerings to the gods, things like that typically would be going on. And not really anybody living in those. There would be more palaces or something nearby for the royalty or the leaders, like these buildings here that you see surrounding the ziggurat in this depiction at the bottom. All right, next we have the Akkadians. These people are going to invade Mesopotamia and conquer it and for somewhere between the year 2350 and 2000 BCE. So a minimum of 4,000 years ago. And the leader who is a part of this invasion, Sargon I, he's the one who's going to conquer the Sumerians. And he's going to be in charge for roughly 60 years and is going to unite all of Mesopotamia, all of the Fertile Crescent region under one political entity, under the Akkadian, I guess you could say, empire, because that is a large territory that it is covering here. Now, after the Akkadians, we're going to see the Babylonians. So around 2000, they're going to rise to power in the same area, and they are going to have the city of Babylon, which is going to be the most well-known city to come out of this region. It's basically the capital of many, many kingdoms and empires to follow over the next several thousand years. Now, from 1795 to 1750 BCE, we're going to see the reign of Hammurabi, and he was the king of Babylon. And he, during his reign, is going to create what we now call the Code of Hammurabi. This is one of the oldest and earliest law codes that has been discovered in the world. And it's basically, with these rules, whatever you do to me gets done back to you. Like the phrase "an eye for an eye." Like if you cause someone to lose their eye, your eye is going to get ripped out of your head. If say you build homes for a living, you build a house and the person living in the house, there's something wrong with the roof and the roof caves in and kills the homeowner's son, you, the contractor who built the house, your son will be put to death in recompense for you causing someone else's kid to be killed. So it's some pretty crazy stuff like that. Very, very strict, very, very brutal, because these executions were basically for any type of law breaking. Very brutal. If you stole something, your hand was chopped off. You stole again, you have no hands anymore. Stuff like that. Now, this one is something that I like talking about, the Hanging Gardens of Babylon. So this is one of the great wonders of the ancient world. It was built by Nebuchadnezzar II during the 500s BCE. And the story behind it is basically this. He got married to this woman who was from further east in a mountainous region, and he was head over heels in love with his wife. Now, of course, she had to move to where he was in Babylon, which is a very flat desert type terrain. She was longing for the mountains of her homeland. She missed the mountains and the plants and trees and the animals. She missed it all. So, what he did for her was he basically built a mountain in the middle of the desert for her. He made a terraced pyramid essentially, and he had his engineers find a way to pump water out of the ground up into this pyramid to basically create what we see here in this lower right picture, where there are waterfalls and like water running through like little man-made creeks and rivers all around this garden that he had built for her so that she would feel more at home in Babylon. That's one of those like really nice stories from history that also happens to be true. It's odd, but it's one of those really nice stories that you get to hear. We're also going to see in the Mesopotamian culture one of the first epic tales ever to be recorded, and is the Epic of Gilgamesh. This was written on clay tablets. Most of it is translated. Some sections of clay tablets are missing because, they're old, so stuff breaks off and deteriorates over time. But we have the vast majority of the story, and basically, it is about a king who is named Gilgamesh, and he is a incredibly strong and proud individual, and the gods basically are going to be trying to humble him, make him not be as like high and mighty about himself. So they send this guy Enkidu to basically humiliate the king, but in the fight that's supposed to humiliate the king, they end up just knocking the snot out of each other and becoming best buddies and go on adventures together. But in the end, Enkidu ends up dying, and Gilgamesh is not able to, really get over the fact his best friend is now dead. And it's like you see the growth that the gods wanted for Gilgamesh happen. And it's actually really an interesting story. If you ever get the chance to read it or hear an audiobook of it or something, it is actually a really good tale. Now, the next civilization that we talk about is the Hittites. These people, they are going to be coming out during the 1400 to 1200 BCE time period. Now, they are going to be expanding from Anatolia, which is modern day Turkey, and moving south down the Mediterranean coast, taking like modern day Syria and Israel, and going down to go after Egypt. Now, 1258 is the height of their power, where they have a lot of territory, but they're going to go up against the Egyptians at the Battle of Kadesh, which is, we're going to, as we'll talk about more, next time, we're going to get the Pharaoh Ramses II, who was a brilliant general and tactician on the battlefield. And this is like one of the first recorded major battles in human history. And we're going to see the Egyptians win this fight because, they knew what they needed to do to fight in the Egyptian desert because, they're from there. Now, we're then going to see after that just a slow decrease in the power of the Hittites until they are eventually destroyed by the Phrygians. All right, so now let's talk about the Assyrians. These guys created a huge empire, the first like major empire. So they're getting founded in 1900 BCE, and slowly over time they're going to be conquering more and more territory as the The Hittites are losing power. These guys are gaining power. We're getting all sorts of stuff like that. Now, they get started around 1900, but it's not until 1,000 years later that they are at the peak of their power under a guy named Sargon II. So 671, they're going to conquer Egypt. We're going to see them successfully capture the capital, Memphis. We're going to see, a lot of great kings who are just ever expanding the Assyrian Empire. But, like all empires, they eventually come to an end. And by the late 600s, like 627, we're going to start seeing revolts breaking out all around the empire, and they're going to fall over the next 15 or so years. And yeah, it kind of, just breaks up into smaller kingdoms after that, basically. Now, the last one we're going to talk about today is the Chaldeans. These guys, they are going to occupy Ur, which is still a city that is around during this time, down here near the Persian Gulf. And they are going to build a smaller empire, but they're going to follow the rivers up. They're going to take Babylon, and they're not really going to be around for more than 450 years, really, when they are conquered by Cyrus of Persia. Persia is one of those empires that when we get to talking about them, a lot of really good and crazy things get talked about. Now, I say here return of the Jews because at one point they were actually expelled from their homeland and relocated further into Mesopotamia, but the Chaldeans actually let them go home. So yeah, there's the Hebrews, the Jews, they're constantly being moved around throughout human history. Now, that's where we're ending today. When we come back next time, we will be talking about Egypt. All right, talk to you then.